And as we know, I'm often a little bit clumsy when it comes to tech on this channel, but monitors is one area I don't mess about. Talk about a bit later. That was actually almost curtains. Ladies and gentlemen, if it wasn't already massively obvious from the title, the thumbnail, and then now this huge box on the desk, today we're checking out a gaming monitor with a difference, because this aims to be the ultimate gaming ultrawide. As you know, I absolutely love ultrawide monitors. I think for most people, when it comes to gaming, they are pretty much the best of the best. And this actually has a quantum dot OLED panel. It is 240 Hz in refresh rate and has a resolution of 3440 by 1440. So for all intents and purposes, this should be a pretty epic gaming monitor, but it does come with a pretty beastly price tag. So the question is this thing actually any good? And is it going to be worth buying? Let's get our game on and find out, shall we? Right after a short word from this video's sponsor. The NZXT H7 Flow 2024 is here to make your PC sing. This beautiful new mid-tower chassis reinvents component placement, moving the power supply to the rear and opening up new space for three 120mm fans below the graphics card. The mesh intakes allow for plenty of airflow, whilst the minimal design and recessed motherboard tray let your components stand true and tall. There really is so much to love about this new chassis, so start planning your next build today with the link down below. And here's the thing, right? I know I say this in quite a few monitor videos when we talk about like ultimate specifications and things, but there really isn't, that's gonna hit the camera, that much more that you would want from a gaming panel. And when you think it was only a few years ago that 240 Hz displays were actually brand new, and you had to put up and suffer with one of those twisted pneumatic TN panels that had horrible viewing angles, everything looked washed out. The fact that we are here today where we have quantum dot OLED and then HDR visuals that really do make your games and pretty much anything that supports the technology look a lot more lifelike and realistic, I think it's fair to say that we are very much living in a golden age, or at least a golden age of gaming monitors. And today I actually want to start this by asking you guys a genuine question, because the thing with Corsair, especially Corsair monitors, is that they are actually relatively new to, well, this whole landscape of making PC monitors. And obviously you get a whole bunch of different panels and the different manufacturers will then kind of take those and then turn it into their own display. So you've got a fair bit of competition for this. The main one is going to be one from MSI. It's around about £150 in the UK cheaper than this at the time of filming, which means that this Corsair needs to be significantly better than that monitor to obviously be worth it. And I don't know, and this is where the question comes out to you guys, whether the Corsair name is big enough in monitors yet to sort of demand that price premium, because obviously they make so many different things. They're associated with PC gaming, that's great, but part of me still thinks they'd be better off making it £100 less and having a few more features, but then just trying to get their name a little bit more into the monitor market, because they're not Asus yet. I mean, this is what MSI are trying to do, and I don't think they're there either, but maybe I'm wrong. Let me know down in the comment section below, when you're looking at gaming monitors, is Corsair a name that comes to your mind, and would you kind of be more tempted to buy a monitor because it's a Corsair monitor? And as we know, I'm often a little bit clumsy when it comes to tech on this channel, but monitors is one area I don't mess about. That would definitely be a very expensive mistake now, wouldn't it? And obviously, if you are using the same panel as some of your competition that are charging less money, then one of the ways you can improve this is just to have a better design, have it look better, be more sturdy, more adjustments. And to be fair, it's a nice looking stand. It's actually relatively lightweight, but I do like this kind of more minimal look and this white color. It should install very easily. Yeah, there you go, completely toollessly. And then you can grab the feet. This just slots in, and then one thumb screw later. Now, obviously this is a curved ultrawide monitor as well. If we take this film off, we can do our reflectivity test. Oh, that is very satisfying, not gonna lie. Part of me does always think they are going to peel a bit of the screen off though, but it hasn't happened yet. Let's go back to that reflectivity test. So there we are. Now, obviously, because this is quite a big display, only 34 inches, it's not the 38 that I've been waiting for ages, but this is very much, it depends what lights you've got in your room, because you can see those studio lights. The second it hits it, that's really annoying, but then you can move it ever so slightly and it does disappear. So curves can either help or hinder depending on the exact lighting situation in your room. But if you are in a room where you can't control it, then it's kind of a little bit of a lottery, I suppose, with the curved monitor, whether it's going to, as I say, help or hinder. Let's turn this round to the other side though, and this is kind of reminding me a little bit of like one of those LG productivity monitors. I used to have an LG UC99. This is what I think is very reminiscent of. It's trying to go almost like Apple Mac-esque as well. But I like the fact that organizing all the cables should be pretty straightforward through here. Then you've got two HDMIs. Annoyingly, they don't have ARC. This is something I'm seeing on the Alienware monitors, and it's really useful because if you want to use a soundbar, you can just plug it in and it's really easy. But these do actually support a 4K input if you want to use a console. You've also got DisplayPort 1.4 and then USB-C with power delivery. So if you're going to use this with like a Mac by day and then game on it by night, then obviously this pretty much has everything covered. So it's very minimal. It's got a very thick Corsair text, but I think it looks pretty good. Oh, you see what I mean about that reflection? Look, just by chance. For what it's worth, by the way, you do get a white power cable inside the box as well. Oh, but it's short. That is useless. Corsair, why have you given us such a short cable? Although, to be fair, I didn't actually notice all of the ports on the right-hand side as well. Loads of USB. So again, this is kind of going for productivity, but there's an issue that we'll talk about a bit later. That was actually almost curtains. That was not part of the script. I mean, there was no script. Well, as we get this connected to our computer, let's hope no harm done. I thought for a second there that I actually had damaged that corner, but no, that is just part of the wallpaper, it's fine. Corsair never send me anything ever again. But then again, maybe you could just argue that that's not a great stand. Top tip for you there, the Marcus PC Centric Special.
It's always easier to blame someone else for your own problems.
Jokes aside though, this has loads of impact straight away. I mean, it helps actually that it's a decent wallpaper image. I didn't plan that, it just changed by itself. But in terms of like the overall immersion that you're gonna get for this, that's what's so good about Ultrawide. If you've not used one before, I promise you, unless you're specifically playing 16:9 games or you're playing something really competitive that kind of cuts resolution off, I think this is way, way better for gaming. I always have and always will. Obviously it's difficult because it depends what you're going to use your monitor for, the size of your space, what's available, loads of different factors, but if I could choose any monitor with any technology, any resolution, all of that stuff, it would definitely be ultrawide, so that's great. Now, the other thing that you notice straight away is that this is clearly a Samsung panel. Everything is quite saturated, which I think looks very good, but might not necessarily be accurate. But then also this has that Samsung semi-gloss panel that just looks phenomenal. It is so, so striking. The last monitor I tested was LCD actually. It was an Alienware 27 inches, and it's kind of like a night and day difference between the two, really. I think a lot of people these days are kind of making the argument between matte and glossy, and people are very strong one way or the other. But again, I assure you, if you actually see these things in person, the panel coating really does help just to aid with that little bit extra contrast, the saturation. And on video, people often think that QD-OLEDs have quite a lot of raised blacks, and we'll look into this throughout the video, don't worry. But I will say that's actually something that does particularly show up more in video, because people like myself often like raise the shadows a little bit on the footage that you're probably seeing now, which obviously can affect that. But we do all of the tests, all of the black levels, so you see those properly. But yes, there's no doubt about that. This is definitely one good looking display. So I assume it's not an overclock. Yep, there we are. 240 Hertz, bang, straight out the box. You don't have to fiddle about with settings. Now, here comes the issue that I think is going to be the talk of the town really when it comes to this monitor and the MSI, and that is the fact that this is a new panel for 2024, but the problem with it is, whilst they have a better level of color, better brightness than the early generation QD-OLED panels, they do not feature the same advancements, let's say, to the sub-pixel layout of the pixels themselves. And especially with 1440p, if you're going to be using this for productivity, then you might notice that the text doesn't look quite so sharp. So the test here is, well, I mean, that is kind of obvious when you know what to look for, really. So around all of the text here where it says Outlaws, it doesn't necessarily look white. You can definitely see some fringing around the text. Now, it doesn't seem to actually affect the logos. It's just specifically the white text where it's obviously so small, and the sub-pixel layout just means that it's prone to this. This is a problem. It's disappointing that this hasn't been updated to the latest generation. I don't really know why, but is it a problem? Well, I can notice it here, and I'd say, it looks fine, but it's noticeable, right? I'm kind of indifferent about it. But as soon as you come back to a normal distance, well, it just looks like text, really. It's really hard to notice. So I think this is going to be something that is going to be very easy for people to say, no, not buying that, that's it. They haven't updated the sub-pixel layout, forget it. But that would be doing a massive disservice to this monitor, because it's a problem. Well, I don't even know. I wouldn't go as far to say that. I'd say it's a flaw in the technology, but it's not necessarily a problem. I will say, though, that now that it is in 240 Hertz mode, that definitely feels very responsive. Now, We've spoken about this loads of times, but obviously the difference between 60 and 120 frames is huge, like quite literally a massive game changer. 120 to 240, if you're good at the game, is definitely going to be a decent advantage. 240 and above, very much diminishing returns unless you're an esports professional. Because this is a lower resolution than 4K, and obviously you can use technologies like DLSS and things like that, I think actually the 240Hz is going to be a selling point. Now, whether it's worth buying it over one of these 170Hz monitors that we had on the previous generation comes down to price. There's definitely going to be a lot more value on the old tech, but if you play competitive stuff and you want an ultrawide, the 240Hz is definitely going to be useful. But let's go over to, ow, 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 that's bad, that's bad, ow, 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 oh. It's not funny, that's really bad, ow. Why is this video so prone to incidents today? I was trying to say that we're going to get our Blur Busters motion tests in, and I've smashed my knee on the table leg. Anyway, putting my body in the line for you guys, I am really impressed with this. It's really hard to change tacks when you hurt yourself. I'm really impressed with this. It's very obvious from the off, really, that the alien here is very, very sharp. I'll overlay this with B-roll so you can see it, hopefully in its true glory. But obviously, when you're looking at even like a TN monitor, but certainly like a VA or an IPS, you just get a lot of trailing here. And the ways you can actually reduce this down are to increase the frame rate, and obviously the pixel is then updated more often, or to reduce the pixel response time. And this is what OLED is so good at. Now, this one is rated at 0.03 milliseconds. Whether it actually hits that is obviously a little bit debatable, depends on a lot of factors, but the point is it's way better than IPS or VA while still having even better image quality. So the only downside really is going to be the sub-pixel layout and the fact that it's going to be more prone to burn-in. But as long as you're okay with that, the advantages that you get are going to be really pronounced. And even if you are playing a game at a lower frame rate, so let's say you're playing, I don't know, Black Myth at like 95 FPS, that's still going to look a lot better on this than a rivaling IPS or VA monitor because of that response time. It's going to be lower, so even though the frame rate is the same, the image is still going to be less smeary and sharper, which is a pretty cool little benefit that I think a lot of people don't actually realize. But there's no doubt about it. It's not strictly the best of the best because I've used 1440p 480Hz OLED monitors. You can find the full video on that in the top right corner of your screen. But genuinely, I don't think anyone's going to have a problem with this. It looks awesome. Ow, my leg. Rightio then, everyone. As you'd expect, I've taken a few hours to get everything set up, calibrated, actually work out whether this thing has any fundamental flaws. And actually, the good news is, so far, so good. As you'd expect, I mean, color accuracy wasn't perfect out the box. I used my colorimeter. It is this one actually, Datacolor Spider X Pro. You can get them on Amazon. I'll leave a link down below. If you're going to do any productivity work, obviously you need to get it calibrated for the best results. But out of the box actually wasn't too bad. There is a slight green tinge. I've seen this on most OLED monitors. It wasn't a night and day difference between pre-calibration and post, which is good. So actually one of the better OLED monitors I've seen. And now we can actually jump into some games. And this is exactly the sort of thing that I think really benefits actually from having a ultra-wide monitor, and this obviously being like a RTS or any sort of strategy game where like having a lot of real estate is really useful. So in some games, the wider the screen gets, then the more elements are kind of pushed away. But this one, Surviving Mars, actually does a pretty good job over on ultra-wide, actually, to be fair. So you can see everything is still easy enough to see, but you don't have to like look all into the far corners and constantly move your mouse from left to right. And actually we've got a frame rate counter in the top right corner of your screen. Now obviously I'm kind of cheating a little bit because we have Intel Ultra 9 actually. If you want to see the full build guide of this, including like the fans and things, you can find that in the top right corner of your screen. This is an Ultra 9 285K build with an RTX 4090, and as you can see, we're not quite getting 240 FPS, but it's not far off at around about 230. And because this is actually a G-Sync compatible monitor, I don't think the MSI competitor is. That is one of the main differences. I know that one had some issues with their adaptive sync that's since been updated with a firmware update, so this is going to help to reduce the stutter and tearing that you're going to get in games. But I mean, the clarity of this screen is pretty phenomenal, really. I mean, it's obviously a very orange game because you're on Mars, but actually having all of that color volume actually really does help just to make everything pop and look pretty fantastic. Any areas of contrast really, like where you've got this shadow here, even without having the HDR enabled here, it really does look a cut above your average LCD monitor. I'm really happy with it actually. And while it's not as large as the 38-inch that I'm used to, that only really matters, I think, for productivity. When it comes to gaming, this is pretty much going to be the sweet spot for most people. It'll still fit on your desk, even if you do want to have your PC on board. And obviously, it's going to look fantastic in the process as well. But let's now conclude our Mars session and say that it has been successfully survived, and then move on to our next title, which for me is the thing I play all of the time. I'm genuinely addicted. I'm getting better. I've reduced my daily hours from about 3 to an hour and a half. I've got other things to do, like making videos, but we'll press on to that. But before we do, quickly touching on like color accuracy, volume, and then also this slightly annoying bezel that you have around the screen. It's already quite thick, but then you've got like a bezel in the bezel with this little gap around the panel. It's not the end of the world, but it is something to note. I have a feeling this might actually be due to the pixel orbiting feature of the monitor that helps to reduce the amount of OLED retention you're going to get. I'll also say as well that there is a feature that I thought was only going to be on the Asus monitors, but seems to be on this as well, where the problem you get quite often with OLEDs is that when you make windows bigger and smaller, you can see it here, the brightness of the screen actually kind of changes as well. But there is a setting that you can actually turn on that reduces this substantially, but you can see, especially in the blacks, it kind of just raises it. It's going to be fine for gaming because you kind of want it to, well, be as bright as possible. You're not going to have like your whole screen as affected, let's say. But when you're in the desktop, it is quite annoying when you're messing around with windows and you're making things bigger or smaller, or in particular, if you've got something that's windowed and you make it full screen, you're aware of it every time it happens, which is quite annoying. But if you go into the options menu, which I must admit, when Corsair started making these, I kind of gave them the benefit of the doubts, but they've been making monitors for ages now, so I would have liked to see something a little bit, I don't necessarily want to say easier to use, but maybe just a bit nicer to use. This is a little bit plain and boring, and some of the menu settings are kind of in the wrong place. I mean, case in point, if we scroll down to Screen Life Management, this is where our brightness stabilizer is. That obviously helps to reduce the amount of brightness difference you get when you change those windows. I don't know why this is in Screen Life Management. Surely that should be in Picture or something, because this makes it sound like it's something for the health of the display. Rather, for me personally, it's more about the usability and just making it nicer to use. But anyway, oh wait, Pixel Orbit is actually off. So if you turn this on, that bezel now gets even bigger. That's annoying. Okay, you have a bezel pretty much all the time, unless it's doing orbiting within the orbiting as well. I don't really know, but yes, you can see you now have this little annoying bezel around the screen. So that is quite frustrating, but if you're doing productivity, I would advise using that setting. But we will get there in the end. Let's find this brightness stabilizer. We'll turn this off and you'll see everything does get quite a lot brighter, but then when you now make this bigger and smaller, it is going to be a more dramatic difference. I mean, the easiest way of showing you this is to open up Steam, and then we can make our window bigger and smaller, and you can now see it is definitely a lot more dramatic. I have actually updated the firmware on this as well. The main thing that's fixed is the sRGB mode. That was very soft. They've added a sharpness slider for that as well, so that fixes that problem, which is good. In the default, it's still very soft, but you can change this. The only other thing as well that's worth noting is that if you do have the brightness stabilizer turned off, then you can get a peak brightness for, well, not peak brightness, you can get a sustained brightness in SDR mode for just over 300 nits or so, whereas this goes to about 260 nits or so when you have that brightness stabilizer on. So the trade-off is you get more consistent brightness. It's not going to be as annoying to use for productivity, but then your monitor is a little bit dimmer, a little bit darker. So pick your poison, really. I'd probably leave it on unless I was primarily gaming, and then I'd leave it off. But if you play a lot of HDR titles, then this will override the setting anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But okay, everyone, as promised, it is now time to actually get gaming. And of course, as soon as I start talking to the camera, I die. It seems to be always the way. And this is against bots, which really doesn't make me look very good now, does it? But this is Smite 2. This is currently in alpha, so obviously take everything you see with a slight pinch of salt, but I've been enjoying it. True story, one of my first proper PC games that I got addicted to that wasn't RuneScape was Smite. I think I played that for about 3 years, like every day on the trot, and then I've taken like 10 years out and I'm back into Smite 2. And I've got to say, I've been really enjoying it so far, but this is exactly the sort of game where you do need a decent monitor, because it's all about Twitch reactions, and it's kind of like you don't want to have your equipment getting in the way. You need a decent gaming mouse and you need a decent gaming monitor to be able to show you all of those frames and for everything to just be as fluid as possible, essentially. And it is working really well actually here. And actually one of the main benefits of testing this is because I can do a proper apples to to apples comparison with the Alienware 4K 32-inch QD-OLED that is that new generation with that better sub-pixel layout really, because obviously I use that all of the time. And I've got to say that other than the resolution and obviously the fact that this is an ultra-wide, image quality does seem to be very much the same, and that's a great thing because on both of these monitors, I've got to say it's pretty much the best of the best really. I mean, we can sort of be nitpicky between all of the different brands, but there's no doubt about it that, in my opinion, QD-OLED is just the best way to go for all-round image quality in combination with the finish that they use with their panels. I think it's just great all round, and I think you're going to absolutely love it. And I would say that I do prefer this form factor for Smite. I mean, if it does cut some of the detail out, it's only going to be the top and the bottom. It's not really something I would say I can notice anything negative in this particular game, but if you're playing something like Apex Legends, then it does potentially cut into the amount of stuff you can see. But as I say, as it's just more like vertical top and bottom, in most games it's just not going to be an issue because it's stuff you don't necessarily need to see. You might disagree with me, that's fine. I would advise then going for a 16:9 monitor so you can make sure you can see everything at all times. But then if you're playing something like PUBG or any, I don't know, Fortnite or anything, then actually having more screen in front of you, so if you can see a little bit movement in the distance, if you're like playing as a sniper or something, I think that's more useful than potentially missing a little bit at the top and the bottom. But again, you're welcome to disagree, that's absolutely fine, but I think this is a nicer way to play than the 4K 32 that I have downstairs. In fact, I will be swapping after this video. Well, our next test is going to be HDR, but for some reason, when I turn it on, it looks like this, which isn't very good. As I said, I've just done a firmware update. I hope it hasn't broken it. Okay, let's try a different PC. Oh, what a surprise. It's the monitor. I knew I should have updated the firmware. Honestly, guys, you can't write this stuff sometimes. It has actually been 3.5 weeks, I think, since I last filmed what you've just seen. Long story short, I had a dud monitor, or a monitor that did work, was pre-production, and it had some incompatible firmware that was supplied to me that hadn't been tested, and it bricked my monitor. I think this might happen to some other pre-production units as well, like throughout the press sphere, whatever you want to call us. So that monitor is going to have to go back, but the good news in all of this is that I've got a new one that does work with the firmware that's running on it, and the old monitor I was actually able to use in SDR for the last 3.5 weeks, so I can actually now review that monitor rather than it just be a preview, which is good, I suppose. There's only really 2 things I would say I've probably learned in that time though. Well, negative things. The first one and the biggest one, and do be aware of this going in because I couldn't find a way to fix it, is that you do get quite a lot of OLED flicker when running G-Sync. So the only way I could actually get rid of this was to turn G-Sync off, which is obviously quite frustrating because you don't want to do it. But I will say that because this is such a high refresh rate monitor anyway, it negates the need for variable refresh as much, because even if you are running a lower refresh, because the intervals that the monitor is still refreshing at, if you do run it at 240 Hertz, it's going to be less prone to stutter or tearing. But it is frustrating. This is one of the big features, if you like, of a monitor like this, is that it's G-Sync compatible. But as I say, in both Smite 2 and as soon as I fired up Dragon Age that we have here. And then the other one is just the menu system is, as I say, it's rubbish. So there are 2 different HDR modes on this. You activate them by going into the menu. I also don't like the button, it feels pretty cheap. And you go through, you find picture, and then here you have HDR peak brightness and HDR, and if you want to change to see what HDR looks like, it turns the monitor off, the PC then has to work out what's going on, and this whole cycle takes around about 20 seconds or so. So why would you do this? Like the Asus monitors I've used, you have different modes, you can literally just cycle through them. The whole thing has to change, and to be honest, the HDR mode doesn't look anywhere near as good as the peak brightness mode anyway, so I don't know why you'd want to use this.
It's really quite annoying.
But anyway, let's put this back into the peak brightness mode and then actually talk about the HDR. And I've played most of my Dragon Age, the Veilguard, on my OLED TV downstairs, and I will say that I like the extra immersion that you get with ultrawide. That's the main selling point, especially if you are definitely going to sit at a desk. I think this is fantastic, but I will say that this is definitely not as good as playing it on the LG G7, the LG G4 77-inch TV I have downstairs. I mean, whether that's a fair comparison is up to you. I mean, they're both OLED monitors, they're both supposed to be like best of the best, but one is significantly more expensive and a lot bigger than the other, so I guess you could argue it's not a fair comparison. But there's 2 things really that I noticed. One is that the color is good, but it definitely doesn't have that kind of like saturation or richness, even actually with something like the 32-inch PG-32 UCDM or the MSI variant of that, because I literally changed from that monitor to this, and I will say that there is quite a noticeable difference actually between the two. I mean, this is probably a little bit more realistic, to be fair. It's not like crazy oversaturated, but personally for a gaming monitor, I like having the extra color volume, and I'd say it is, as I say, quite a noticeable difference between the two. So I wouldn't say this looks quite as good as the 32-inch monitors, but having said that, because this is more of a matte panel, this is going to be more usable really in a lot of different spaces. But obviously judging a monitor's HDR performance just in one title would be pretty unfair, so what I'm going to do is give it the benefit of the doubt and we'll try it with something else. And I would say that Returnal, which is obviously what we're playing here, is probably the most impactful game yet in terms of HDR, because especially on an OLED panel, because you have so much contrast, you have all of these little blobs and all of these lights and orbs and things just floating around, that actually having an HDR monitor makes such a big difference here, that if you can, especially in combination with an OLED, if you can show all of those highlights and you can get all of the color saturation and you just have everything on one display, it can be really visually striking. And I will say that actually the effect here is definitely a lot better. I think this monitor probably is better suited to like small areas of lights rather than obviously filling the whole display. So something like a sky in Dragon Age is going to be harder to do, if you like, on an OLED panel, or just any monitor really, but particularly on an OLED, where obviously the brighter the whole screen is, the dimmer the whole screen is. Whereas if you just have like certain bits of light, it's a lot easier for it to get bright. Whereas on an LCD, obviously you have like, it's kind of the opposite, because you've got really bright backlights that can get bright, but then if you have small areas of light, then you need more zone to not have any of the haloing issues and things. So this is what OLED is going to be really good at. And I've got to say actually that I'm pretty impressed with what we've got on offer here. I would say that Returnal is looking really pretty darn fine here. Again, it's not the absolute best of the best, but I would say I'm very visually impressed with what I'm seeing here, which I can't say I was necessarily getting with Dragon Age. So maybe I was wrong. Maybe Dragon Age is just like not implemented quite as well when it comes to HDR. But as I say, I've been playing a lot of that game and it was kind of noticeable that it looked better on the television than it does here. But we're just going to cut really, I think, straight to the conclusion, because as I say, I've been using this for several weeks now, and I'm going to die. Using this for several weeks now, and I've really enjoyed it actually. I mean, other than the annoyances with the G-Sync, which I think is a big bummer, and obviously the fact that the price is really high, I've not got too many dislikes with this, to be honest. It's just been a great all-round solid monitor. The elephant in the room is that you can get a much cheaper MSI version of this. I think actually at the time of filming, it's around about £1,050 in the UK for this, whereas if we not look at the dogs on the camera downstairs and actually look at this monitor, £799 for the MSI version of this. And obviously there are going to be differences. It's not going to be exactly the same monitor, but bearing in mind it basically has the same panel. I mean, why would you spend £350 more on the Corsair version? Because it's not for the menu system. I mean, the stand's quite nice. It still has a little bit of wobble, but you probably just get like a wall mount if you want it to look as clean as possible anyway, and you wouldn't use the stand. I also don't like the way it says Corsair on the bottom. I don't know, maybe I'm just like sensitive to these things. I just find it a little bit annoying. I want it to be more minimal. The bezels on this thing are quite thick. It's more that this is a great display. I've really enjoyed using it, but would I pay £1,050 for it? No. Would I strongly consider the MSI version? Yes. But I would also strongly consider getting the MSI version that's 175Hz and costs a lot less, and put that extra money into a better PC, a better graphics card. Or if I was dead set on spending £1,000, then as I say, I think that the 240Hz 16:9 displays are just better than this really, and are going to give you a more striking experience and are just going to be better really. But it depends what you want. The title of this video is probably going to be something along the lines of the best ultra-wide gaming monitor I've ever used. And I stand by that. I think this thing is awesome. I would prefer it was 38-inch, had a slightly better resolution, had better ultra-wide, had better HDR, better brightness, but it doesn't. And I'm waiting for that monitor to exist. But in the meantime, I think this thing is awesome. But if you want ultra-wide, as I say, have a look at the cheaper options on there, because I think they're going to give you better value for money. And what Corsair are giving you here, I don't think it's worth the extra asking price personally, but maybe you disagree. Let me know down in the comment section below. What do you make of this monitor? Is this like the dream form factor for you? Has this got everything that you want? Or would you prefer to go for something else or save a ton of money and no one should spend £1,000 on a monitor? Let us know your thoughts on this down in the comment section below. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this. Get yourself subscribed. And of course, if you do want to check out current pricing on this monitor, on its competitors, or anything that was featured in this video, you can find everything listed down below with our affiliate links. The NZXT H7 Flow 2024 is here to make your PC sing. This beautiful new mid-tower chassis reinvents component placement, moving the power supply to the rear and opening up new space for three 120mm fans below the graphics card. The mesh intakes allow for plenty of airflow, whilst the minimal design and recessed motherboard tray lets your components stand true and tall. There really is so much to love about this new chassis, so start planning your next build today with the link down below. But thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.